Welcome back. Welcome back to another episode Before the Fame podcast. This is your host, Jordan. And this episode that I got for you guys, it's a very special one. This is a very special day, a very special week. We celebrated Juneteenth yesterday. We got some good hours at work. I was able to get some good laughs and spend some time with some special people. But today is my grandfather's birthday, Clarence Ellison. He was a very pivotal part of my family in my life. And he's the man who I first saw preach, like the very first preacher in my family, at least, that I saw preach. And also the first man that I saw cry, right? He was the first for a lot of things. A lot of things. Like I learned how to tie a tie from him. I learned how to dress from him. I learned how to be a man from him. And, all of the things that I'm going to speak about in this episode is predicated to his teachings, his way of doing things. So this episode is dedicated to you, Papa. I love you. Happy birthday. I hope you are laughing up there with your daughter and your wife. But we're going to get into this episode of Before the Fame. And the title of this episode is God Provides, I Work. Right? So I've said this many times before. And I feel like all the things that I've gone through in the past 3 years has proven that I have not been the source, right? I may have had the resources. I may have had the knowledge in some areas. I'm not, knowledgeable in all things, but, I may have had the knowledge to get to where I'm at, but the source has always been the same. And hopefully after this episode, you will understand what I mean when I say that. So before we get into it, we got to thank God for getting us through another week. It's been a rainy week for most of us. If you work from home, then shout out to you, because you don't have to deal with all of this traffic and rainy days, but it's been peaceful nonetheless. And I thank him also just for another day of getting it right, so that's, to me, one of the biggest parts of me getting to this part of the week. Like, I'm always reflecting on all the things that I've overcome or that I, worked through and all of that. So just shout out to God for that. But now for this episode, I have a few things I want to touch on, right? So the past few weeks, we talked to you guys about Adam and Eve's story, right? And how Adam was given an assignment from God, right? He had Eve taken from his rib. We know all of that. But now we get to the point where when Eve was tempted to eat from the tree of knowledge, and she also gave some to Adam, right? The covenant between Adam and God had been broken, right? They were told not to eat from this tree, and he did it anyways, right? And now when we get deeper into the story and talking about, how God provided all of their needs in this garden, right? He didn't ask Adam to provide money. He didn't ask Adam to provide a home. He didn't even ask Adam to provide for Eve, right? All Adam had to do was watch over the garden, work the garden, right? And now, as humans evolved, as humans made more purpose for themselves, we have turned this idea of providing into a job, right? We've turned this into a responsibility on the man, right? And in some cases, we've turned it into a responsibility on the woman. So for me, I want to get back to the real truth, right? Not what society wants us to do, not what your parents did or your grandparents, but I want to get back to the one basic truth that we all know. In the beginning, there was only one man, one woman who was given this whole land to watch over, right? To multiply. And, like I said, when we get deeper into their story, we see that it wasn't that hard, right? There wasn't too many challenges that Adam had to overcome, right? There wasn't too many things that he had to face or fend off from this garden. But nevertheless, as humans, he made this mistake, ate from the tree, and now, of course, naturally, God had to punish him, right? And just like all of us who disobey God's commands and his wishes, we will get punished for it, right? And because of that, now we are exposed to death, right? We are exposed to sin through Adam's mistake, right? But now I want to shift gears a little bit because though Adam had this choice, right? We all have a choice, right? We all have a choice to live a life of obeying God's commands, or we can do our own thing, right? This is why God gave us free will. And this is also why I feel like we butt heads as a community, right? Where most men, they feel like all they do is go to work and they pay for bills. And, some men, they're not coming, to the table with these expectations. But I think that beyond that, it's more about how we perceive this title of being a provider, being a protector, and all of this stuff, right? So once again, I think that, the gender roles in all of this has kind of sort of been flip-flopped, throughout the years. And as humans evolved, like I said, you had it to where it used to be where the man went out and worked and the woman was at home taking care of the kids and all of that. But as time progressed, women have become the breadwinners, right? Women have become the homeowners. Women have become the provider in a sense, right? And you have more men now who are, whether they're coming from, being imprisoned or, just simply lazy or giving themselves excuses, to not do better, they are the ones who have become the helper, in a sense. And I know some people are going to say, hey, I don't have any help. I don't have the support system that most people have. And, while that may be true, we're just speaking on the roles right now, right? So, like I said, the roles have kind of flip-flopped in a sense where you don't have that provider, or at least it's not common for men to provide anymore. And I want to examine that, right? I want to examine why that is, because, for most cases, you can say that, it's hard out here to get a job and all of that. You can say that society hasn't necessarily been fair to you. But I would like to say that for me and my story and my journey throughout my work force, throughout my time here, I think that with everything that I've been exposed to, I've been around a lot of people who come from different backgrounds. And the one thing that remained common, again, was that the people who believed in God, who obeyed his commands, they always had stuff that was provided for them, right? Whether it was a good paying job or a lower paying job, they always had the basic things that was provided to them, right? And it's not until we get to the point where we think that we're comfortable with what we have, or that we start wanting more, desiring, nicer things, that we see or we get further away from God in a sense, right? And there's nothing wrong to want more for yourself. There's nothing wrong with wanting to better your circumstances, to, go back to school if you want to, just get in a better situation. But like I said, I think that when people accept where they are, when people embrace their journey, when they are thankful for what they have, when they take care of what they have, they get to the point where they are preparing themselves for the bigger blessings, right? And let me give you an example. So my mother was going through her issues with her kidney. She had this disease ever since she was 19 years old. And for her to deal with that while also having two children, while also going to college, graduating from college, that was a very tough thing to deal with, right? But my mother also never complained about the circumstances that she was in, right? She always wanted better, right? She always wanted to get us to the point where we didn't have to depend on anyone and all of that good stuff. But there was also times where my mother knew that she didn't have the support system that most people had. So she got to the point where she was able to buy her own house. She was able to move out of her sister's home and get herself together. There was a shift, right? There was a shift in her mindset. There was a shift in everything that she was doing, because she realized that she had done enough for her sisters. She had done enough for her mother. She had done enough for her father. She had done enough for all of the people in her life up until that point. But now she wanted to do for herself and her children. And in this time frame, there was a lot of people around who, wanted to be there for her. They wanted to have her back and all of that good stuff. But, I saw my mother shift from doing for others to doing for herself, right? And in this moment, I was proud of her. I wanted her to continue to live her life as if she was a normal person, even though I knew she wasn't, always all right. Right. Some days she would be sad. Some days she would just stay home. But I still wanted her to live her life. Right. And in this time frame, she also had to stop working as well. Right. She wasn't able to work. So things were very rough, for a period, but it also was a beautiful time because I got to see a different side of my mom. Right. I got to see the vulnerability. Right. And it's not that I didn't see that before. Right. I just was too young to understand it. Right. I was very young. All I wanted to do was to be able to go outside and play with my friends. And I was able to do that, right? But, I just got to see a different side of my mom that I cherish to this day, because it really taught me that even in your times of rest, right, God provides, right? That to me is the biggest thing that I want to share with you guys today, that God isn't just about providing financial parts to our lives. It's not about just providing a home or all the material things that we wish for. God provides rest, right? And in that time frame, I got to see my mother be, or it was some of the happiest and saddest times of my life, because through all of that, she dealt with the miscarriage, or not a miscarriage. She had a stillbirth with my brother, Joshua. And that time frame, it was very hard for her. But once again, it was a beautiful time as well, because I never seen my mother that happy, right? I never seen her happier than in that moment of bonding with my younger brother. And he would have been 17 going on 18 now. That's crazy to think of, but he would have definitely been the highlight of her life, up until that point, just because of all the things that she had to go through. And this is why I say, God, he provided so many blessings in such a quick time that we couldn't even understand it, right? We couldn't understand what was going on, or at least I couldn't. But, now I see it for what it is, right? I see how even in those times of not having as much as others had, we had way more than a lot of other people. And it was all because my mother, she worked 2 jobs. She was doing her best to provide for her 2 sons. And, she couldn't bring her third son into this world, but it still was a blessing nonetheless, right? For her to even have him, as a thought, it was like, it really wasn't, we weren't supposed to be at that point in our lives, but God has his plans. And also, this is why when we talking about provision, right? We also talked about that before, and how it's not just about providing money, right? It wasn't about providing money, right? My mother provided a space where we could come to her and we could be vulnerable. We could be at peace with what was going on, even if it wasn't necessarily peaceful. She gave us that space to come to her, to be honest with her. And she was honest with us, right? Sometimes it was a little too honest. And once again, that inspired me to do the same for my children, God willing. But it inspired me to speak the truth, to tell the truth, no matter if it hurts or if it makes me look bad. I want to be that for my children, because if they don't know who I am, if they can't see through my works that I was a man who was imperfect, who still tried to show up, who still did show up, I was still that type of guy, then, no matter what is said at my funeral, no matter what is put on my tombstone, it doesn't really matter, right? I just want them to understand who their father was and who the man that was created from all of this, right? And this is why my platform is what it is, because I'm not famous yet. As y'all know, I'm still, working. I'm a work in progress, but, going forward, like I said, we are creating that story, right? This is one step at a time. My goals are still right ahead of me. I just got to continue working. That's the whole point. Like, my work is not done. And until that is, right, I can't rest. Not in the sense that I can't sleep or anything, but I can't stop doing what I'm doing. And that's what gives me the motivation to get up every day. That's what gives me the motivation to keep going. Also my story through Brandon Pope. He is very pivotal in this whole process, right? Me and him, we've had so many talks about what it is that we wanted to do, our legacies, and how we can keep that going, right? Even after, he has passed, it's like each episode, I feel him, I feel his presence. Whenever I'm around his family, we always have a good time. And there's never been a time where I felt more eager to get up and do than now, right? And some of you who follow me on Instagram, you may have seen a video of us at a Juneteenth event. This was in 2020. This was one of the first and only Juneteenth events that I've ever been to in my life. And I was honored to be a part of this event, right? Because this was organized by one of our good Columbia alumni. And this event, it just hosted a lot of Black businesses. It hosted, people who are in our community who have been doing great things. And I was just glad to be able to be a part of that. I was glad to be there to see my friend who was doing what he loved, right? He was doing what he loved. And it was just a time to embrace where we are and where we come from. And I was just thankful just to be there, right? I was thankful to say that I know the DJ. And a lot of people, knew him, but they didn't know him like we knew him. So that time frame was just unforgettable. Just a moment in time that I would never forget. It created one of the iconic photos, in my opinion, with me and Brandon. I wasn't even paying attention. I was just on my phone. But, for us, that was our relationship, right? We were brothers. We had lived together. We had been through a lot of BS that year, but like I said, to be able to get through it, to be able to get past the stuff that happened, all of that happened that year, it was real inspiring. And I'll say this now because that was one of the years where we were just going through, or we were still going through COVID protocols, and we weren't able to really get work like that. But even in that time, God still provided, right? God still provided a roof over our heads. We had food. We never went without that year. And this is why I say, in our estimation of things, right? Because I'm going to get back to my point of how today we think that the whole role of a man is to provide, right? And while in some cases that is true, right? We are designed to provide for our families, to provide for our households. I also feel like just because that was stated before, you can also say that a woman's role is to help provide, right? It's not to necessarily take over as the man or to be the provider in a sense, but it's to help him provide. And that can come in many ways, right? You can be the person who helps out with the home. You can be the person who helps out in business. You can be the person who helps, just by being there. Your presence is helpful, right? Your encouragement is helpful. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to step up and be the provider yourself, because the same way God is in that man to provide and do all the good things, God is in you as well. And for us to get back to that point where we are coexisting, where we are at unity with each other, we have to understand that this is a shared responsibility, right? When it comes to building and taking care of a home, that is a shared responsibility. When it comes to raising children, when it comes to building that village, that is a shared responsibility. You cannot put all the responsibility on one person. And quite frankly, that's what leads to burnouts. That's what leads to splits. That's what leads to divorce. All the things that we don't necessarily want in our lives, but sometimes it's necessary for us to find ourselves. And it's not necessarily wrong that you have to go through these things. But what I would see in my life and how I've gotten to this point is that when one person has to do it all, one person has to pay all the bills or provide everything, that is where strain comes in the relationship. That is where people start to break away from one another, right? And lastly, I want to say that we talk about one of the most misused Bible verses, which is faith without works is dead, right? And on one hand, you can say that, if you're not working on yourself, if you're not working towards your purpose, if you're not working in hand with what God is providing you, you're not going to be successful, right? You're not going to accomplish the potential future that God has for you, right? But now, where I think that most of us misuse this verse is where they see people like my mother who couldn't necessarily work, right? She couldn't necessarily provide an income like she was used to doing. And they put people in a box to where even if you are operating off of a level of faith, even if you are giving your best effort daily, they start to look at you differently, right? And this is also why when I see people going through their struggles with finding work and, in between jobs, I don't necessarily judge them, right? I'm not going to sit here and call you a bum just because you aren't necessarily bringing in income. But what I will say is if you haven't put forth your best effort, if you haven't given your time to at least strengthen your relationship with God and get right, from all the things that you were doing wrong before, then of course, when you do come into your next opportunity, you're going to take, some parts of it is going to feel like, hey, I can get away with this, or I'm going to, you know, just be laxed about that. And that is why, again, when I talk about these things, I'm not just saying this, from a place where I wasn't in it, right? This has happened to me before. This happened to me recently, actually. And when it happened, I had to examine why I went through that, right? What happened that led to me getting to that point. And that is why now I feel like I don't have to worry about that anymore, right? And it's not to say that I can't be laid off tomorrow or today, but I'm more confident in myself now because I've been through those times of not having. I've been through those times of living off the streets, living with what God gave me, right? It wasn't anything that I did that, besides me seeking work. Like that was the only thing that I would say that I had to get up and do. But outside of that, God provided everything that I needed, right? He can provide everything you need if you believe. But I think going forward, one thing that we do have to say and do for ourselves outside of believing, outside of working, is letting go of that need for control, letting go of the desire to have all the nice things, because it's not going to get us any closer, right? It's not going to bring us back to that unity that I know for me, I'm seeking it, right? Outside of, seeking the kingdom, I want us to be unified. I want us to work together as a unit. And we're not going to do that just by working, right? That to me, that takes a deeper level of communication. It takes a deeper level of understanding, takes a deeper level of patience, right? But all of that requires self-work. All of that requires reflection. All of that requires us doing the shadow work. And that's what we're going to get into deeper on the next episode of Before the Fame. I thank you guys for listening. And if you want to follow me for more, you can do so on my YouTube channel, JoJo's Toolbox. That's JoJoStoolbox on YouTube. You can also follow me on TikTok at JoJo's Toolbox as well. Thank you guys for listening to Before the Fame.